Hi everyone. In my last video on deburring tools, a commenter named Rick Palechuk asked if I could make a shop-made triangular scraper and show it with heat treating and everything. Well, Rick, ask and ye shall receive. I dug up an old triangular file. It's actually broken at the tip and pretty dull, so I'm going to see if I can actually make two of them out of this. I think I can cut it right about there and reuse the existing tang on this one. And then up here, I'll grind this part down for a new tang and have one about that long for getting into really tiny spaces. My first step is going to be annealing that file to make it softer. What I'm going to do there is heat it up to a cherry red and then let it cool down slowly by shoving it into a bunch of cat litter. That's going to insulate it a bit and help it retain that heat. This is an optional step, but it's going to make grinding off all those teeth and reshaping the tips a whole lot easier, especially on that shorter one where I'm going to be grinding off all that material for the tang. You could easily take the file as is and just bring it over to a belt grinder or bench grinder and you'll get it done, but it's going to grind a lot slower as a hard piece of steel. Kitty litter is not actually my first choice for doing this. Blacksmiths use something called vermiculite to insulate their parts. It's a fluffy substance. It's used in gardening a lot as an amendment to the soil. But kitty litter works pretty well, and I couldn't find vermiculite locally. So I went ahead and used this, and it's been in here for about 4 hours while I went through the rest of my day at work. It's cool to the touch now, and I need to see if it actually got hardened. I talked with my blacksmith friend Larry, and he was saying that I really should have gotten it up to the critical temperature, the point where it becomes non-magnetic, which is more of an orange heat. I got it up to about cherry red. In the previous clip, you probably noticed it was a little dim. That's because I turned off all of the shop lights. That way I could see the color of the part a little bit better. Now I'm going to file test this, which is weird because I'm file testing a file, and I want to see if this file bites into that. And it does. It's taken off some of the teeth on this one, and yes, this one seems to be unaffected. So I got it soft enough anyway. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut these parts to length and get it all laid out. Then I'll set up my belt sander and grind off the teeth and reshape. I'm going to use my other scraper just to sort of get an idea on the length. I think this ought to look pretty good. This also gives me plenty of room for a tang, just like down here, with about an inch up here on the other scraper. So I'm going to cut it right there. I think that should work quite nicely. I was originally thinking I would get the tang put in first on the small one, but as I'm doing that, I'm realizing I should probably get rid of the teeth first, otherwise it's going to be hard to hold. I don't know if you could see what I was doing on camera, but as I went along the belt, I started to rotate out a little bit at the end, and that's so I could bring this to a point. And I did it as roughly the same as I could on all three sides. Alright, I've got this roughed in, the teeth are all gone. I'm going to refine it with a finer belt in a bit, but you can see I've knocked off the corners, and I went ahead and tapered the end, made it a little bit cylindrical, or round at least. If I had to do this again, I would have ground off all the teeth while the file was still intact, because it would have made it a whole lot easier to hold on to. So if you're going to do this at home, don't follow what I did. Leave the file intact, get all the teeth ground off, and then cut it to length. You can even do this tang while the file is still in one piece. Just mark it out, knock off your corners, do whatever you need to do. It would have been so much easier. Anyway, I'm going to move on to the other piece. And you can see, hopefully anyway, I was not terribly accurate with my angle grinder wheel, and I cut it at quite a bit of an angle, but that doesn't matter because I'm going to be tapering that up just like this into a little point. Alright, that was about 10 minutes of grinding, and I've got all the teeth off. You can still see somewhat remnants of them right on the very edge, but I think those will come off with finer grits. And I've got it up to a nice point. About the same as my other scrapers. There's nothing critical about these. This one, the small one, is a bit of a finer point. But like I said, there's nothing critical. You're using these to deburr holes, so you don't have to get them to a particular dimension. It's the best kind of project, really. I initially used 60 grit, and that did the vast majority of the shaping, and that took about 10 minutes for each piece. And then I spent a few more minutes with 150 grit, and then this was 220 grit, the finest belt that I have. I'm ready to heat treat. I've got my two pieces. I have a can of canola oil, which is a pretty decent choice. It's not the best, but it's accessible and it doesn't smoke very much. On the side of the can, I've stuck a small rare earth magnet. That way I can test to see if my part is still magnetic. And once it's not, it's good to dunk. That's the critical temperature. I've got a handy dandy pair of blacksmith tongs that I made with my buddy Larry. And I have a propane torch. This is one of those ones that gives you a little bit of extra heat by swirling the flame. So let's go ahead and get started. This one's going to be a good bit harder because it's such a long blade. It would be nice if I had a little forge, but I haven't gotten around to building one yet. Breaking out my hardness testing files. You can get a set of these for about $70, $75, I think. But they go from 40 to 65 Rockwell C in 5 Rockwell increments. I'm going to use these to see just how hard I got the pieces. And I'm not really sure what this can get up to. I'm guessing this is going to bite. Actually, no. 65 is not biting on that one. So that's good. I don't think I got this one quite as hot. Yeah, 65 is definitely scratching it. It's harder towards the tip, but softer back here. I really didn't get this very hot back here at all. Alright, 55 is not touching it. My pieces are hardened and ready to temper. Tempering is going to draw back the hardness so it's not glass hard and not brittle. I'm going to do that in my toaster oven for at least 2 hours, probably at 400 degrees. I think that's the most it'll do. If I had a heat treat oven, I could control that a little bit more. But I want to tell you about this free app that if you do any heat treating at all, you should probably check this out. It's from the Heat Treating Society, and you can look up any alloy of steel there is. You probably can't see my phone screen, but I'm going to type in 1095 because I believe that's what these are. And it tells you all the specifications of the steel. It talks about uses for it, temperatures for forging and heat treating and tempering, as well as tempering times, and especially tempering temperatures to get a certain hardness after the fact. These are cutting tools, so I want them to still be pretty hard, but I don't want them to just shatter if I accidentally drop it. So I'm going to bring them down to about 55. Of course, the larger blades probably already right there. I've got this out of the toaster oven now, and you can see I got sort of a dark straw color, dark brown color. It went a little bit hotter than I wanted to, and I don't know if it's just because the toaster oven's not very reliable in that regard, or if it's because the cross section was so small. But that gets up to, according to this picture that I have, maybe around the 500 degree range. I had it set at 425. I'm guessing the temperature was off a little bit. By the way, I'll put a link to this picture. I found this on the internet. I'll put a link to it down in the description, along with another one that's really handy for judging temperatures. You could 100% just temper this with a torch and look at the color, but you're not going to have a whole lot of control in that regard. You'll end up with hot spots and potentially get it a little bit too warm down here or too warm at the tip where it's very fine. So I really like to do it in an oven instead. What I neglected to do before I heat treated these was actually fit them to a handle. That would have been a lot easier to do before heat treatment because I could easily just heat up this tang portion and burn it into the handle and get a much better fit that way. What I'll do instead, just so I don't lose the heat treat, is drill a hole that's pretty close to what this is, to where I'll get it to fit as deep in as I want, and then I'll fill that in with epoxy. I found a couple of file handles in my stash, and I didn't even need to modify them actually. The shanks fit in quite nicely. I'm not going to shove this in because it'll probably get stuck actually. And now I've got a fresh tube of 5-minute epoxy. I tried to find some 15-minute epoxy just to give myself a little bit more wiggle room, but the store was all sold out, so 5-minute it is. And put the mixing tip on. I'm going to squeeze out a fair amount of this because I don't want to run out. And that's probably plenty. Start with the small one. And I'm going to get a lot of squeeze out here, but that's okay. I'll just wipe that up. I'll use the wood of the other one to push it in. There we go. Waste not, want not. Well, here we are. The handle on the small one looks comically large, but it feels very good in the hands, and I think that'll do quite nicely to give me a lot of leverage in a tight space. This one ended up pretty much the same length, slightly shorter than the original, and again, the beefier handle feels very good. This one might be a little long for its size. I'm worried that it might flex, but I don't know, we'll just have to see under use. Sometimes having a really long scraper is quite nice when you're getting into a long bore, for instance, and you need to maybe scrape out a burr or nick that's inside quite a ways. So I can see myself using this quite a bit. If you have any questions or things you'd like to see covered in a future video, leave those down in the comments section below. If you think I've earned it, hit that like and subscribe button while you're down there, and maybe consider supporting the channel over on Patreon like these amazing people right here. I also have a new Instagram page. You can find me at Stuart DeHarrow. If you're interested in seeing any of my other videos, I have my deburring video that spawned this one right here in the top left, my most recent video in the bottom left, and a video that YouTube thinks you'll like over in the right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.